I guess Buddha had a way of deconstructing the human being. Yeah? Deconstructing, pulling it apart. And there's two major ways, as I'm sure most of you know, is through dependent origination, which explains the run of things, how things happen through time. Just very simply, how information comes in through the senses, how that produces within us a very subjective feeling, pleasant, unpleasant, and then we react to that, how we either want it, or we don't want it, or we're neither here nor there with it. and then upon that you act, you make a decision, and that action always has consequences. So there's your karma in a more popular sense of results. So that would be, as it were, the human being in process, right? But he also divides it like a sort of cross-section, right? And these are called the 5 khandhas, the 5 heaps. And I was just preparing a talk for the course I was doing at Gaia House, and I was centering really on the body, the physical body. And the question is, how much of the body are we actually aware of? I mean, do you know what your liver's doing at the moment? Have you ever felt oxygen replacing carbon dioxide? But I get some lovely facts. Google's wonderful. It doesn't know anything, but it knows where to find stuff. The cornea on the front of the eye, yeah? The actual surface of the cornea changes once every how many days? Put it in your own mind. Just give a figure.
5, 3.
7 to 10 days you're looking through a different cornea. What about this one? How many blood corpuscles, red blood corpuscles, hold on, 2.4 million new red corpuscles are being produced per
hour.
second. Exactly. I'm in a state of shock even when I read these now. And the cells develop in the bone marrow and circulate for, how long do they live for? 2 to 3 months. Before their components are recycled, very ecological, by the white corpuscles. And the whole circulation takes 1 minute. Good stuff, innit? The microbes in our stomach and intestines, which make a difference to our waistline, the brain and the immune system, save us all. There are, have a guess, just in your own head, a figure.
3 trillion.
100 trillion. 100 trillion little gas cells. And the amount in our gut is equal to a pound or 2. So the next time you buy your kilo of sugar, that's what you're carrying around basically in terms of bacteria. So the reason I'm just bringing these facts out is to sort of really get home the fact that we're in the body, but somehow we're not of the body. Yeah? The second thing to recognize is where the Buddha's coming from. So he's not coming from a scientific basis. He's not coming from an objective scientific basis. He's coming from a subjective experience of the world that we all have. Yeah? So, I mean, if you want to pigeonhole him, he's, if you're into a bit of philosophy, he's a phenomenologist. If you're into that sort of stuff. Yeah? And within that experience that we have, which is our little universe, all this is being manufactured within this brain-mind complex, heart-brain-mind complex. Yeah? And this is our universe. The bubble of this consciousness is our universe. And we each have our own little universe. And we're always at the centre of it. You're always the centre of your little universe. See? And the only thing he's interested in is how we create suffering and how we bring it to an end. So his whole teaching really centres around that psychology. And of course they call it an ethical psychology, but it also has its therapeutic side. Yeah? So when you think to yourself, well, what do I actually experience with the body? You go into a feeling, right? So when you're sitting there and you've got pain in the knee, so the first thing you do is you're drawn to it, and you feel it, you feel the pain. And if you're using a noting word just to keep your attention steady, like pain, you're looking at it through a concept. Even if you're not using a noting word, you're still looking at stuff through concepts. Yeah? And then try, as it were, to feel the pain just as a sense, as a feeling, and then you go into it. And when you go into pain, your noting word will change. There may be pressure, there may be heat. So that's a different level of perception. You're right there where the body and mind touch, right? The sense base, right there, where the initial information's coming in, and it's being sensed, and then it's brought in and turned into something that's recognizable. And the first thing we do with any sensation that comes through the body is to determine whether it's pleasant or unpleasant. Right? And from that point on, we have our reaction. Whenever something's pleasant, you tend to be drawn to it, to want to develop it. When it's unpleasant, you definitely want to get rid of it. And that's how we constantly are playing games with the world. Okay? Now he calls those those basic things, which are, I think, are fairly universal in the ancient world, the four elements. So when you look in there, you can see pressure. That's the earth element. You can see some sort of temperature, warmth and stuff. That's the fire element. You can see perhaps some fluidity, elasticity, cohesion, something like that. Especially in the breath, you might feel an elasticity. That's the water element. And then, of course, movement. So movement's your air. Sometimes they call it wind element. So he wants us to get down to that level to begin to sort of deconstruct our experience, to pull it apart. What would be the reason for that? The reason is first of all to see that this idea of being an entity, being a whole, entire unto itself, a sort of one thing, is an illusion. We're made up of all these various sensations that are bombarding us all the time. Yeah, and then to see how we get it wrong, right? So that's the next step, the reactivity. Okay. So he's got the four elements, and then he wants us to explore how we create suffering for ourselves. And the discourse on that, I'm sure many of you know, is the Satipatthana discourse. So he starts off with breathing, which is a neutral feeling. And the reason for breathing is because it's neutral. If you want to develop concentration, a sort of steadiness of attention, it's always best on a neutral sensation. Concentration that's best on something loud, like a pain, is actually quite weak. It feels very strong because the pain draws you in. But when, of course, the stimulus goes, that strong stimulus goes, the mind's off again. But when you develop concentration on something neutral, like the breath, it becomes a quality within the mind itself and tends to stay with you. Okay? But of course, he's particularly interested when you're watching neutral sensations to see the quality of impermanence. Right? Each breath is similar but never the same. Nothing ever repeats itself. Then he talks about the body, the postures of the body, right? The 4 basic postures: sitting, walking, and lying down. He also brings us to this daily awareness of activities, right? I mean, he puts it in, it's basically put into sort of language of, and he acts in full awareness, flexing and extending his limbs, wearing his robes, carrying his outer robe and bowl. It's always centered on the monk, consuming food and tasting, defecating and urinating. Fancy that. So he's supposed to be aware of everything, right? Everything we're doing, we're supposed to be aware of. We should, if it's an action, it should be done deliberately, right? And that's what he's pointing us to. Because when you do something just out of habit, there's usually something else involved. For instance, brushing your teeth at night or in the morning, there's that sense of rush about it. Get it over with and get on to something really important. And so you miss out the opportunity to establish just that moment-to-moment awareness of what you're doing, which is our practice. Yeah? And then he's very much concerned with our relationship to the body. Sense of disgust with certain parts and things that it produces. He has a wonderful list. Feces, bile, phlegm, pus, blood, sweat, fat, tears, grease, spittle, snot, and urine. I mean, he's not queasy, is he? And what he's trying to do is make us explore the sense of disgust we have towards the body. Now, disgust as a taste is natural. If you put something in your mouth which is off, then you should be able to spit it out. But the disgust that we have towards the body has to do something with what we consider to be pleasant and unpleasant, right? So that sense of disgust, you have to ask yourself, well, is it necessary? So by bringing these things to mind, and especially when we are defecating and urinating, to be quite aware of what we're doing and to see that reaction and just recognize actually we are animals. And what's the problem? See? Because human beings always elevate ourselves to something slightly above the animal realm. Well, in a sense we are, but physically speaking, we're the same as cows, sheep, dogs, horses. So he's also very much into awareness, the foulness of the body. Then we just talked about the elements. But then the other big thing, of course, is contemplation of death. So in those days, they would lay the body out in the charnel grounds, and the animals and whoever would come and eat them, you see. Mm-hmm. And you could watch a body corrupt. You could sit there, see, and slowly go through its whole decomposition. He's got all sorts of nice explanations. He's obviously done it. So he's see all kinds of worms, you see. Oh my goodness, and skeleton with flesh and blood, and it goes on and on and on. So it's a case of actually recognizing the process of that decomposition. And you're supposed to sit there and say, as this body is, so is mine, you see. So you're making that connection, you see. And the commentary is very helpful. It says not to sit windward. Okay? And of course, it's difficult for us to do that these days unless it's some animal that we can see has died. But the contemplation of death, he says, is the most powerful of all contemplations. And if you haven't done it, you might think, well, I'll just get gloomy, I'll just be depressed. I'll just depress myself. But the fact is that as you contact your fear of death, letting go of it, accepting its reality that we're all going to die and all that, and just getting in touch with the fear of it and the dislike of it and all that. Of course, as that passes away, when you come back into ordinary daily life, you see how precious it is. So your joy rises. You see, that's the effect of not being afraid of death. So the fear of death is always making us do things to escape death. We're always moving away from it. So in a sense, we're always in contradiction with the world. Yeah? We're always in conflict with it. And this death business is not just a big thing, like when we actually do drop dead. It's actually getting rid of anything we find unpleasant. So, for instance, as soon as you feel a bit depressed, you do what somebody called a duvet dive, and you disappear for an hour or two. And of course, that is actually just a soft suicide. So it's just not actually, you just don't want yourself, you know. When you wake up in the morning, you know, usually you might wake up and you recognize you're there. I'm here, you see. But if you say to yourself, "Oh, not me again," then it's a bit painful. So you got to get into that feel of the depression and stay with it. You see, stay with it. Just as an aside, staying with an emotion. Some of them are pretty heavy and stay with us for quite some time, but if you can stay with a mental state until it actually completely finishes, then you get that sense of purification, the release and everything. And that's when you have more faith, you have more confidence about actually doing the practice. It's the same with something that's obsessive, an obsessive desire. So, you know, if that biscuit tin just keeps getting in the way, you just if you can stand there, just stay still, you know, biscuit, and the thing sort of slowly dies away. And then if you can stay till the very end, when that obsessive thinking just drops away, that's when you get the feeling of liberation. These are little nibbanic moments, and the definition of nibbana is there's none of that sort of desire around. And every time you do that, of course, you undermine the habit. You see, this is the point, you undermine the habit. So the next time it comes, it's not so painful to let go. Yeah? So all that belongs to this sort of heap called the body, rupa. And then you've got feelings. So the heap of feelings is quite straightforward. It's either whatever we see is pleasant or unpleasant. Yeah? So feelings... in the Buddha's language, the word Vedana covers what we would call our physical feelings, such as pain and stuff like that, pain and pleasure, but it also covers our emotional feelings, the either unpleasant or pleasant physical feelings of emotions. All that comes under Vedana. So if you can imagine, the body is offering us feeling. Yeah, and some of it is coming from the mind, the heart, and some of it's directly from the body. Now in meditation, that distinction is important, because if pain is coming from the body, then you just have to be careful that it's not meaningful, you know, that in fact it's not an illness or something. But if it's coming from that, if you can see that some sort of tension in you, some sort of pain, some sort of, some pain in the body, wherever it is, seems to disappear when you get up from the meditation, that's one sure sign that it's some emotion stuck in the body. And you've got to stay with that. You've got to stay with it. And eventually it'll express itself and release itself, right? So remember, every time this emotion comes up and it grabs hold of a story and you're off on La La Land, then it's actually developing itself. When you realise that if you want to make yourself more depressed, all you've got to do is start thinking about how depressing the world is and how depressing all your friends are and how horrible the world is. And before you know it, you're making yourself more depressed. So the way the heart, meaning your emotional life, gets worse is by allowing it to create stories. So that's why there's an effort, not just in meditation, just a constant effort to just bring yourself back to the actual feeling. If that feeling is allowed to express itself through the body, then it's actually expending its energy. It's actually letting it's burning out, and that's the healing process. That's the therapy. You see, but be careful you don't skew your meditation towards that. But then it becomes a psychotherapy, right? Our meditation is much more to do with seeing our relationship to that particular mental state. So as soon as something like I'm feeling a bit down comes up, depression seems to me always to be an illness, but it's like, you know, you just feel a bit down, and it's just, it comes up and you get your normal reaction of sort of indulging it, see, through the mind and giving into it and the heaviness of the body. But as soon as you see that and you just, and you're aware of it and you allow that reaction to pass away, then you just keep lifting the energy, you walk with it. And that way these emotions stop hijacking us. See? So that's the purpose of seeing Vedana. He's very clear on that. So that's the second heap, the second aggregate. The third one is really interesting because here what the mind does, isn't it? You have an experience and it actually creates a photocopy. And the more you have similar experiences, that photocopy grows and grows and grows until you have a concept. And then whenever you see anything, you just plonk that concept on it and say to yourself that you're experiencing it. So take the normal thing of, like the first time you might have, I probably don't remember, the first time you might have seen a rose. You would have been entranced by it. You would have actually looked at it, a strange flower, say, and you would have actually placed your eye on it, and for a while you would have received the information. And then as soon as the word rose is put on it, every time you see a rose, it sort of feeds back onto that idea of a rose, the image of a rose, and then you have the concept rose. So every time you walk down the street and you see a rose, you say, oh, it's a rose. And that's it. But you don't have to look at it. You're not actually absorbing anything from it. You're not seeing it as individual rose. To do that, you've got to bring yourself right back to your eyes, to the actual physical experience. Yeah? So these thoughts, these concepts and whatnot are, of course, necessary in ordinary daily life. But in our meditation, they're a big hindrance. That's why in any vipassana meditation, whatever form, Zen or whatever, the effort is always to come back to the body, to actually what you're experiencing. Yeah? Yeah? So all those things become sanya. Now, when you join those two together, or the three of them really, body, but especially feeling and concepts, and you plonk in some sort of idea, then you have this mental proliferation, this mental imagination working. And those are your next lot, which are your sankharas. But the distinction between the sankharas and the ones before is that they are under our direct control. They are actually what we're actually creating. So the body, whether you like it or not, will have sensations, right? It'll give you feelings. It's just a natural process within the heart-mind. Concepts will arise, whether you like it or not. They might not be particularly sophisticated, but there'll be some image. Even animals have that. Even they might not have a word to put on the concept, but they definitely have concepts because they remember you. Our concepts are our memory, our history. Yeah. So when a dog sees its master or mistress, it remembers. It's not as though it has to keep asking itself, "Who the hell's this?" It just knows this is the one who feeds me. So it's a case of recognizing that it's not as though we don't need those things. We do, right? But as soon as these things begin to come together and it has some sort of direction, then the mind starts creating. And of course, in its most beautiful form, it creates philosophy and art, but normally it's creating rubbish. So you have to sort of keep pulling yourself out of that and bring yourself back to the body and what you're actually doing, right? So remember the usual thing is, the Zen statement, when you wash the pots, just wash the pots, right? I always like to tell this tale I heard somebody told me, I don't know where I got it from. There was a Zen master who would teach that. When you wash the pots, just wash the pots. Anyway, he's eating breakfast and he's reading a newspaper. See, so his students look at him and very gingerly say, Roshi, Roshi, we noticed that you're eating breakfast and reading a newspaper. And he said, yes. He said, well, I'm eating breakfast. I'm eating breakfast. When I'm reading the newspaper, I'm reading the newspaper. So it's not as though it's right, okay. So it's just putting your attention where you're supposed to be putting it. So these sankharas include all our habits, but the important thing in the sankhara is will. Now remember the Buddha's teaching about will. An action and will, he says, are the same thing, right? So will is... Now, in Buddhist psychology, it's so important to make that distinction between a desire and the action. When something is at the level of desire, nothing's actually happened. It remains as a potential. So if you're sat there, and we'll go back to this, the proverbial biscuit. You see, the idea comes up, biscuit, you see, figs, fig biscuit. See, and it's laced with this desire, right? It's really, it's drawing you, see. Now at that point, nothing's actually happened. It just remains the potential. But as soon as you act upon it, that's it, the action's done. And there are consequences, see? Before you know it, you've emptied the tin. See? So it's a case of really recognizing that that we do have a choice, you see. There's no such thing as free will, right? You have to get rid of free will. What you have is discernment. And if you can see that an action is going to cause you suffering, you do have that moment there, just that moment of pulling back and letting go, you see, and waiting for that desire to pass. And when it's a good desire, you know, when it's driven by love, compassion, joy, all the virtues, then you empower it. And just in that way, you draw down all the negative stuff within us, all the negative conditionings, and you build up all the positive, right? So that you end up eventually, hopefully, with this inner environment which is beautiful. I mean, that's the Buddha heart, no? That's not to be confused with the process of awakening, because that's a slightly different process. Okay, but in terms of our psychology, in terms of our psychotherapy, for want of a better word, that's how it works. You just, every time you see a desire come, you have to be right there with it. So the mindfulness has to be awake. You see, as soon as you see a desire come, the question comes: is this wholesome or unwholesome? Is it good for me? Is it good for the other? Is it good for me and the other? If it's not, you have to stay there still, wait for it to pass. See? And that way you decondition. All it is just conditioning. You just decondition that habit. And then when something good comes up, you put your energy into it, and that particular mental state grows. Okay? So it sounds easy, doesn't it? Yeah. I've been having a go at this for years, you know. So that's the sanya. Right now we come to this the final bit, which is vijnana, which is consciousness. Now it would seem that the Buddha uses these words all over the place. There's no. There doesn't seem to be any regularity. So the definition of consciousness you can determine it for yourself. Really, there doesn't seem to be any agreement on it. It depends on what makes sense to you through your experience. So sometimes it has some sort of quality of discernment. See, now all I can give you is my understanding, which of course can be questioned. But as far as I'm concerned, the one definition that comes from the scriptures, which makes complete sense to me, is that consciousness is a screen. That's all, and that its job is to hold an image long enough for it to be known. Right? So whenever any information comes up, it has to be represented. Right? Now, why is there this confusion between consciousness and that discriminative or that understanding faculty? Well, that comes back to another quality within us which is not included in these 5 khandhas. And that's the quality of intuitive awareness. Now, the whole process of awakening is for this intuitive awareness to begin to realize it is not what it's experiencing. Right? So every time you pull back within yourself and you're observing something, it's an object. So whatever is an object can't be the subject. The perceiver can't be the perceived. Yeah? And the more you push yourself, the more you access that position within you of the observer, the feeler, the one who knows, the more you're aware that everything you're experiencing is an object of this very awareness. Yeah? Now, at some point, there might occur to you that within this, all this happening, the feelings, the sensations, the mental images and all that, there is this very clear sense of the observer, the feeler. Yeah? Now, you're aware of being the observer. Yeah? So you can't be that either, can you? And it's that final paradox of stepping out of the observer into pure observing. which is the liberation. And what's being liberated is this very intuitive awareness from its confusion with this psychophysical organism. And the one myth that I find useful in this is Narcissus. Narcissus looked into the pool and he saw this beautiful young man, okay? And he was so entranced that he embraced this young man and fell into the water and drowned. Now, normally this is taken as some sort of pride, right? Some sort of self-love. But it works full well in this sense. Every moment of every day, we wake up into this moment. And this moment, we experience ourselves. And through that sense of a self, we enter into the make-believe world of the psychophysical organism. Water in mythology is always creation, and we drown in it. Our job is to get back up onto that bank. And the first step is to be looking at the created world, which is what we're creating, and to see that sense of self mirroring back to us. So in the quietest of your moments, right, when you are absolutely quiet, which occasionally occurs, just sit there, you see, and the heart is still, there's no big sensation, there's just the breath, and there's just that clear sense of self, you see. As it were, look back into the awareness and ask yourself, what's it made of? What's there? See? And you will not find the body sensation. You won't find feelings. You won't find images and concepts. You won't find anything. It's empty. It is sunyata. It is empty of the phenomenal world that the body, heart, mind is constantly creating. And it dawns upon us slowly that this must be something else. And that's the moment of transcendence. That's the moment you realize that the Buddha is right there within you. And the whole purpose of our practice is that moment of liberation. Right there. Even within a week. I can only hope my words have been of some assistance, that I have not caused even greater confusion, and that you will, by your devotion to practice, liberate yourself from all suffering sooner rather than later.
Questions?
Yeah, why not?
You talked about. Sorry.
Quiet at the back.
Sorry. You talked about death and fear of death, and I would say that I can think of things that are much more fearful than death, and I can control that in terms of I don't have a fear of death, and I think I've been in quite a few situations where I thought I was going to die.
Okay.
And my emotion has been three different things actually. One was, oh, that's sad, I won't be here. One was, oh well, at least I'll be out of any pain. And another emotion that from another time. But very seriously thought I was going to die at that moment. The thing I find difficult is other people and their reaction. So the last time that I feared I was going to die, I thought to myself, oh well, that's okay, I won't wake up in the morning. And then a friend rang me and was talking, and she said, Lynn, I need to tell you, I think you've got this, and you need to be aware that if you don't go to a doctor, you're going to die. Now, I had no intention of going to a doctor, all right? If I'm going to die, I'm going to die. But how does one manage other people's reaction?
Oh, that's their problem.
Well, I know it's their problem.
You don't worry about other people's.
I actually don't want to listen to it.
That's all right, just say I don't want to listen to you.
Which is actually what I did. But
Yeah. No, you can't do anything about other people. It's a never-ending game, no? I mean, you can tell them straight, shut up. You know, I don't want to listen to you anymore. That's a load of rubbish. I mean, you can be kind with it, you know. You don't have to be as direct as me. I'm from the north, you know. To hang about. But I mean, you really don't, I mean, that's one thing you do, isn't it? You don't try and change other people. You don't
No.
No. So, yeah.
Was there somebody at the back who was asking a question?
No, I just fell off the chair falling
Just
asleep. I've covered everything, you see. Yes.
Could you differentiate between consciousness and awareness a little bit for me?
Well, I'm defining consciousness as a screen. It's not aware. It's a screen. It's just like a monitor. You look at a monitor. It's not that the computer is aware of what's happening on its screen, but you are. Your intuitive awareness is your only intelligence. It simply manifests through thought, the intellect, and imagination. But the sort of confusion is such that you think you are. I am the thinker, you know. I am the one who's having the emotion. I am this, I am that.
So is consciousness the screen on which the other four khandhas present themselves?
Yeah, that's as I understand it. That's as I, you know. And there's support for that from the scriptures, you know.
Can you say that consciousness has a quality that when awareness becomes and makes contact with an object, consciousness arises?
I think it's the other way. I think it's the other way around. I think the consciousness arises, and awareness is aware of it. I don't think awareness does anything. It's passive.
A lot of people use consciousness and awareness as the same, though.
That's the problem. Yeah,
Mm.
that's right. I'm definitely make a distinction between that. If you do that, then you end up really as a materialist. If you think that awareness is consciousness, and consciousness is created by the brain, etc., etc., you know, the sort of emergent property, then you're basically saying you are the body, and that's it. But that's not what comes across for me in the scriptures. The Buddha's definitely talking about something which is, I mean, take a look at the words he uses. He uses an ayatana. He says there is a dimension, a sphere, where there's no sun, there's no moon, there's none of these heaps. There's no coming, there's no going, there's no staying still, there's no time. He says just this is the end of suffering. And he's stuck for words. He talks about a consciousness, you see. So again, a consciousness which is without, uncoloured by the senses. A consciousness uncoloured by the senses. In all, without boundary. So that means there's no phenomena there. Right? It's phenomena, it's walls and stuff like that create boundaries. He says there's no boundary, and in all directions full of light. So he's always pointing at something which is transcendent. I don't know how you can miss that, frankly. You know, how you get around the subtlety. I mean, he's not being very subtle about it. He's got loads of adjectives which tend to draw it down to something that you think you can experience as an object: the beautiful, the magnificent, the pleasant, and so on and so forth. But that statement, I mean, it's a famous one, isn't it? There is an unborn, undying, uncreated, unconditioned. If there were not, there'd be no escape from the born, the dying, the created, and the conditioned. I mean, that's right there. That goes back, you know, it's pretty well authenticated as, you know, deep as part of the scriptures. So he's always pointing to something which is beyond. You see, he does warn us it's pretty subtle. And the whole process of vipassana is the process whereby you can experience it, or Zen, or whatever. And all these insight meditation processes are all about objectifying what we're actually experiencing. So remember, as soon as something's an object in you, it can't be the subject.
do you think the normal sort of process of being a human is to objectify things? Why isn't the other state the sort of normal state?
Well, that's the delusion. The delusion is that you are a human being. It's a big one.
Why are we mostly deluded though?
Because we are. I don't think. I mean, that becomes a sort of what you might call it. That becomes a what's the word? Metaphysical question. It's about ontology, about being, about where you come from. The Buddha is very disappointing. He doesn't tell us anything about why we're here. Yeah, I mean, why? Where does this intuitive awareness come from in the first place? He's silent. Why is it happening in the first place, for heaven's sake? I didn't ask for it. He's not even clear, like we talk about rebirth, but there's no clarity about the process of rebirth. He tells us exactly what motivates birth to birth, which is our ethical behaviour. He doesn't tell us how it happens. There's none of this business of out of the body, the tunnel, and you end up in this beautiful place. Yeah. Very disappointing.
Is it disappointing, or is it on purpose so as not to confuse us even more?
Don't know.
Because, those questions he would not answer. Isn't that simply because it would be confusing?
Well, yes. I mean, there were some questions he wouldn't answer because the questioner was always presuming a self. So when they asked him something like, well, what happens to the Tathagata, which is how he would refer to himself, which means gone there, in other words, the transcendent one, right? That's a decent translation of it. So, what happens if he dies? What happens when he dies? Does he exist? Does he not exist? And then they have this wonderful does he exist and both not exist, or does he neither exist nor not exist? It's a sort of a bit of a paradox. So, and of course he's silent because it's coming from a place, the question is coming from a place of someone, a person, a self, you see. Yeah. Yeah. But when it comes to metaphysics, it's very, very disappointing. I mean, one question that always arises for me is, what is the relationship of my Satipanya, my Buddha nature, to yours? The peculiar thing is that it cannot communicate save through the medium of the physical world, of the psychological physical world. And when the Buddha's asked,
do we know that for a fact?
Yeah, I think so, because in itself, it's unable to, it has no way of communicating with another. Actually, it's not a fact. It's just a presumption on my part, I think.
But it has an intuitive skill.
It has an intuitive skill. I'm just wondering whether it can communicate without a medium. See, the Buddha says he sees no beginning to karma. So the physical, there's a suggestion there that the physical world, the phenomenal world, the world of the mind, is coexistent with this transcendent world. I don't know.
Are there any teachings about psychic awareness?
Well, you can get the powers, different powers. I'll give you a lovely story about that. There was when I was in, I used to teach in the Isle of Man many years ago, and there was a Jungian psychotherapist, and he told me that he was very interested in Buddhism at one point, and he went to Burma. And when he got there, they sent him up to Mandalay, to the big university monasteries up there, with an interpreter. And he went up and he was introduced to this very old monk, he said, who was basically sitting in an empty room surrounded by books. And he was just sat there. And before long, they went into a long discussion. I remember him saying it was about an hour and a half, 2 hours, talking about Buddhism. And it was only when he was leaving the monastery that he realised he hadn't been using the interpreter. Yeah, a bit much, isn't it? That's weird. That is really weird. And as he's telling me, there's still that sort of shock on his face when he realised that he'd been talking. The monk was in talking in Burmese, and they understood each other completely. Yeah. So yes, clairvoyance and all that sort of stuff. That's all. Who's that the Indian woman? There's a biography of her who had powers. Who am I thinking of?
Is it Deepa Ma?
Yeah, Deepa Ma. Well, if you read that book, it's quite amazing what she was capable of. 2 bodies, for instance, to create a mental body. Take care of this boring man, I think. So yeah. That comes with the practice of concentration. I don't know how you develop these things, but yeah.
Can you speak of the relationship between awareness and the objects of awareness?
Well, basically it's that. Awareness isn't what it's aware of.
But are objects a manifestation of awareness?
No. The object's a manifestation of this psychophysical organism. That's what it does. It creates mental objects for us.
So,
and
so
physical.
is awareness independent of the object?
Well, that's what we've got to discover. Is it the same, or is it something other? That's the process of investigation. That's the process of understanding not self. So remember, he didn't say there was no self. That would be ridiculous. Everybody feels a self. What he's saying is that this is looking at something and saying, well, is this me? Is it mine? Is it myself? I mean, even the body will say things like, I have a bad knee. So you have a bad knee, right? But then I am feeling ill. We've got a dualistic relationship with the body. Some parts we have, and some parts we are. Basically, you just catch your language and then your relationship to it, you see. And as soon as you have a relationship of mine or I, then suffering arises. Because, if you say your body is, I'm my body, and it falls ill, then you're ill. Hence you're suffering. Yeah.
You take on its limitations.
Yeah. Very good. Can I leave you with a little blessing? This blessing says, may you enjoy great good fortune. May all the powers that be, the force, be with you. May you receive the blessings of the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Bhavatu sabba mangalang rakantu sabba devata sabba buddhanu bhavena sabba dhammanu bhavena sabba sanganu bhavena sada soti bhavantu te. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.